I want to first start this video off by saying I'm going to describe what this video is for. It's a very specific reason. Everyone with these placements is not going to have these exact issues. If you are struggling with fourth house energy, this video is for you. If you feel like you are adopting too many of your family's emotional problems, if you feel there's like a generational curse around something within your family, if you feel like you have inherited some of the emotions of family members or the ways they respond to things, and you're trying to break free from that, this video is for you. Okay, this video is focusing on a very nuanced problem. It does not mean everybody with this placement is going to have this exact issue. Hey, Tim, this is Virgo. Let's talk about the emotions that you have inherited and how to potentially deal with these emotions using what's on the sign of the cusp of your fourth house. Talk about that in a moment. Before I jump in, if you have TikTok, please follow me, Amethyst Virgo Astrology. There I like to do a lot of updates about current transits and the seasons, the zodiac seasons, and I have some other content on there. So I already have a video about the fourth house. I already have an ICDC video, okay? If you want to dive deeper. What I want to talk about today is your fourth house cusp and how that is an indicator of how we handle certain things emotionally directly. Now, of course, we can say, well, the eighth house is also a place where people can harbor very deep, intense emotions. But remember, the eighth house is more those underlying things that we have internalized that can take our power or make us more powerful, right? When we think of eighth house. The fourth house, we're dealing, though, with what we are born into, our family. So who we are raised by has a huge impact on us, whether it's your biological family or not. Also, here's the point. This is not an IC video. We're not talking about the MCIC. I have a video about that. The reason why is because if you use whole signs, technically your IC could be in the fifth house, right? So I'm talking about anyone who has a certain sign on the cusp. You have some people that use Placidus and you have interceptions in your chart. So you might have Scorpio on the cusp of your fourth house, but you have Sagittarius in that fourth house. Or you may have Gemini on the cusp of your fourth house, but you actually have Cancer in the fourth house, right? So this video is more so for anyone looking at this particular placement. I'm not talking specifically about the IC. As we talk about with astrology, there's nuance to everything, meaning, yeah, I can interpret a chart and you can interpret a chart or you can know a placement, but there's multiple ways to interpret a placement. It goes even deeper than that. Specifically, how you can sometimes use your fourth house cusp to understand the emotions that you have inherited from your family in order for you to really understand what it is that you need to do, because sometimes we inherit emotional responses from our family, from who raised us, that isn't actually conducive to who we choose to be or want to be as an adult. So this can help us understand where things are coming from. Again, inheritance from the fourth house is more of the emotions or generational trauma. We're inheriting traits from people. We're inheriting feelings from people. We are inheriting, and sometimes you look at even spiritual gifts from people. Fourth house, where you come from, who your roots. The eighth house, we start talking about someone passing a house down to you or money or leaving you a large sum of money. That's eighth house. Okay, there's a difference. So let's jump into Aries. If you have Aries on the cusp of your fourth house, you could have an emotional reaction to situations where you feel like you have to take on everything. You feel like you have to deal with everybody's problems, or you feel like you have to do everything on your own. You watch somebody do this, or you were told to do this, or maybe you're the eldest and a lot was placed on you, or you had to take care of younger siblings, or you were a person that had to take care of family members. Maybe you were a caretaker for someone in your family. And so now you feel this pressure anytime you're in a situation where you're responsible for other people, that you have to do everything. And this can be passed down even in your household present day. If you are a person that's created your own family, or you live with roommates, or you live with a bunch of people, because the fourth house is still our home, even if we don't live with family. You feel like you have to take on everything. You feel, you struggle to ask for help. You struggle to acknowledge when you need to pause and ask for someone. And you struggle to also divide the labor up of things. You could be a person where you take on a lot that you don't need to take on. So for you, it's about understanding, still being, because we can't change our placements, right? It is about still being loyal to your need to have drive and to take initiative and to be the one sometimes no, we're going to do it this way. But you also have to learn to let go and realize when you do have to delegate more opportunities for other people to do things in the household or in the family. You might be the person that's always taking care of, grandma's sick, and you're always the cousin, or you're always the grandchild or great grandchild that runs there. And it's like, but there's all these other grandchildren. Like, if you have Aries in the cusp of your fourth house, you might have inherited this over dependent, independent type of mindset, whether it was placed on you or you grew up watching someone else do that, and now you feel like that's the way you have to function. And so choosing to do that, or if you are sometimes being placed in those positions where you really need to not be. Taurus in the cusp of the fourth house. Again, if you want a more in-depth interpretation, look at my signs through the houses video, or specifically the fourth house video. If you're looking for planets, if you're talking about the IC-DC axis, you can go to that video. Here I want to talk about, again, the potential for you to inherit something from your family. And again, it doesn't have to be your direct mom or dad. It simply could be the environment, the culture that you were even raised in. With Taurus here, it can sometimes mean an over-reliance emotionally on possessions or money or things that are of too much of monetary value. You may be in a situation where it was leveraged against you. You might have been in a situation where you felt like to earn something, to get someone's love, you had to give to them, or they used items to replace what you might have needed in terms of affection, especially if you are a person with a lot of water in your chart, or you have Chiron in a water sign. You might have needed more emotional connection, but you are seeing or in situations where you are being shown that possessions and things that you own is important. And so a lot of people with this placement, this IC on the cusp, especially if Venus is aspected in certain ways in the birth chart, become very reliant on being successful, having a lot of nice things, having the best things, having the best items, having the best, having the latest thing, having certain objects and things, and maybe being a little bit possessive because that is maybe the way in which you were introduced to. There's emotions tied to things we have. Don't get me wrong. There is sentimental value. So the positive would be if I was doing a birth chart analysis of someone, I could say that someone with Taurus cusp fourth house, especially let's say they do have Venus and Taurus in the fourth, or they have a placement in the fourth, or they, moon and Taurus fourth. Yes, objects and items can have sentimental value to anyone they can. But this would be, you would want to watch out if anyone in your family or you're being exposed to this feeling of like, you have to earn someone's affection through things, through items, through what you have, through what you have to bargain, even if it's like a sibling where it's like, oh, the only time my sibling gives attention to me or wants to play with me is when I give them some of my candy. And then that sounds funny, right? But then think about what that would mean for a person as an adult. Our first look into socialization is with our siblings. Typically, again, age differences can be a part of that as well. But third house is siblings. It comes right before the fourth house. So if we are trained or we are conditioned to behave a certain way, it can show up in our adulthood where we still think the same way. To get love and appreciation and emotional satisfaction, we have to receive an item from someone, or we have to give something to someone. And it can sometimes mean lacking the real authenticity of relationships. So just being mindful of that if that is a situation that sounds familiar to anyone. Gemini. If you have Gemini on the cusp of your fourth house, an issue that sometimes can arise, a parent or someone in the family that was a little bit guarded in their communication. They didn't tell you certain things. You grew up like, I didn't learn that until I was older. You think a lot about like people in other generations where parents didn't talk about certain things with their kids, about sexuality and things like that. And so a lot of people figured it out on their own or the hard way. So that's an example. It's like, if you Gemini on the cusp of the fourth house, a potential issue could be inheriting communication issues, struggling to be direct or clear, growing up in a household where your parents don't have really good communication skills, being very guarded about the things that you do share or that you're seen shared. And so now you are inheriting that where you're kind of conditioned to believe that things are, certain things don't need to be talked about, certain things don't need to be shared. Now, again, we're talking about if we are looking at the fourth house and there is some type of affliction, okay? If we're talking about the fourth house, there's any type of, there could be a problem there. Everyone is not going to have a problem. So you may have to learn within your new family, if you choose to have one, or with people you're close to, how to reestablish what positive and healthy communication looks like. right? You could have grown up in a house where there was silent treatment when someone was mad at someone. And so now you were like, hey, when I'm mad at someone, I don't need to speak up. I don't need to say anything. I'm just going to, right? And you have to ask yourself, is that how I want to do things? And sometimes people might need a silent treatment from you, right? Sometimes you're not ready to speak to someone about something, but it is important for you to really investigate this feeling if you feel this is a residual of how you were raised, brought up. Cancer. If you've Cancer in the cusp of the 4th house and you're having some issues with emotions, this could be about growing up in situations where your family member or people in your family did not handle emotions positively. It could mean someone was over emotional, someone let their emotions rule them. It could be just dealing with situations where you constantly felt, what's the word I'm trying to say? You constantly felt triggered by the emotions of others in your family, or there was someone in your family who triggered really negative reactions from you. And so this could cause a person either shut down, where you're like, I don't want to deal with emotions, because every time somebody starts getting emotional, reminds me of my aunt or my mom or my grandfather or my father or my stepdad or whoever, right? So sometimes that 4th house energy, if it's a problem, it can mean you shy away from it now, right? So Cancer's on your IC, where it's like there's a need to heal that, but you shy away from it because in the past it wasn't safe, because people didn't make it safe to really express emotions in your household. It could also mean someone was over emotional in your family. There was no logic. There was no way of calming this person down. There was always something, especially if we look at, maybe you have Mars and Cancer in your 4th house. Maybe your moon in your chart squares your mother's sun, or your dad's moon squares your Mercury, right? Something is just off, where you're trying to learn how to deal with these patterns of emotions, because you may be inheriting unhealthy ways in how to deal with your emotions, right? So you want to avoid that if you feel like it is something that's hindering you. Leo. If you have Leo on the cusp of the 4th house and you're dealing with emotional issues or family issues, or you're trying to just figure out how to not, carry on some of the same traits or behaviors as others, it can represent typically 5th house. Typically Leo here can be people who are always want to keeping the family together. I want to keep everything positive. I want to keep everything upbeat, especially if there's any of the Leo in the actual birth chart. I want to keep everything upbeat, because remember that Leo in that chart would likely have to be, if it's Leo's on the cusp of the fourth house, unless this person has an interception in their chart and Leo's also in the 3rd house. Either way, 3rd, 4th, 5th, Leo, right? Even if you have an interception, even if Leo shows up twice in your chart, that would be Placidus, the people that have interceptions. If you're like, whoa, I use whole signs, don't worry about it. But the point that I'm making is Leo showing up in 3rd, 4th, or 5th. Again, that's a family. So 5th house could be your children. 4th house is your family. 3rd house could be siblings, cousins, things like that. So either way, that energy means you're trying to always keep someone happy. You might feel like you're the one who has to keep the family together. The family doesn't get along, but you're always trying to bring everyone together. The parents want to get a divorce, but you're the sibling is like, no, don't divorce. I don't want to lose, that type. And so what happens is sometimes you don't see things clearly. You don't see the root of the problem. You don't see the issue with certain things in your family, because you're always trying to look at the bright side. You're always trying to look at something positively. And there's nothing wrong with, sometimes we do have to have a positive outlook. Everything in life cannot be doom and gloom, or we would never move on. But you can be holding on to this vision of like a happy family. Everyone has to be happy. And sometimes when we don't look at the reality of what's really in front of us, we actually hinder the growth of ourselves and of people that we are close to, because we are trying to hold on to something that really isn't happy. We're trying to hold on to something that isn't what we think it is, but we want it to be something that is not. Virgo. If you have Virgo on the cusp of your 4th house and you're dealing with emotional issues or issues from your past, issues from your family, whatever the case may be, you might be dealing with, you think things have to be a certain way in order for you to be happy. You might have a fixation on certain things. You might not know how to let go. You've grown up maybe around someone who had a fixation. If this wasn't perfect, then nothing went right. And so now you sometimes may have a hard time enjoying life, looking at the brighter side of things, establishing ways to really create happiness, even when things aren't perfect, things aren't going well. You might sometimes have a little anxiety about things. Oh my gosh, I'm trying to plan this birthday party. I can't find these party favors. And you like letting little things get to you emotionally can sometimes be the case, Virgo, cusp of 4th house, if you are having emotional issues, if you are realizing this is a problem, like not a problem for everybody. but you notice that you may sometimes get really triggered by things that are small. This can seem insignificant to other people, but it's a big deal to you. But it also can be may have grown up in a situation where someone in your family, someone that you were exposed to, there was a lack of control, or this person couldn't control everything in their life, so they want to control the small things. And then you want to watch out if you're also doing that same thing, because it's like, okay, you grew up in a house where the rules are very specific, but then you have roommates. And when you have roommates, there's common decency, there's respect for each other's belongings. There should be, correct? And everyone pays their fair share. But you also can't control people, right, that are grown people, like paying bills as well. And so sometimes there can be issues with that placement. I'm not saying Virgo in general, but Virgo on the cusp of the fourth house, especially if you have anything there, if you grew up with this expectation that things have to go in order and they have to be a certain way, and this person was very fixated on something, because now in your life you think that is the key to happiness, the key to be emotionally safe, to feel good, is to control everything and to control the smaller things. And there's nothing wrong with that. Virgo energy is needed, but I'm not talking about Virgo energy in general. I'm talking about this specific placement. But it stops you from feeling sometimes. When you're trying too hard to control the minute things, it stops you from feeling. And if we're talking about the fourth house, we do need to have a way in which we're emotionally healthy. If you've Libra on the cusp of your fourth house and you've struggled with, again, the past, family, emotional issues, and you're just trying to figure out how do you break free from those things that you've experienced, it can mean like the negative here is there is a codependency. You believe that there's a need that you have to always be in union with someone, or you have to always be in agreement with someone. It bothers you to not be talking to that cousin that you shouldn't be talking to, because every time there's always drama with that cousin, but it bothers you because you believe in unity and you believe in union. And you're like, no, we have to figure this out. We're going to figure this out, especially if you're a person that has like Mars and Libra or something like that. We're going to figure this out. We're going to work through this. Because there's a fear of going at things alone. It could also be a situation where you fear moving away from the family home. You fear living by yourself. You fear not having a partner. You could be someone who grew up with a parent who was very much always in a relationship, and you kind of grew to see, and sometimes the relationships weren't good, but you grew to see that as like, oh, this is normal, right? Toxic stuff in relationships is normal, right? Just as long as you have one. Again, we would have to look at your entire chart to know if that's the case. But that's the example that I want to make there, is that you can definitely have situations like that where like it's too much codependency. It is this idea of like, I have to smooth everything out. I have to be okay with everybody. But sometimes being okay with everybody, because you feel this obligation, it drains you. And so you can have a hard time cutting people off, especially if you have any Pisces in that chart as well. You have a hard time cutting people off who are draining you because you believe so much in like, no, this has to fit together and I'm going to make it fit together. So just really examining those types of responses that you have to situations so that you are making the best decisions for who you choose to let into your life and give your emotions to. Scorpio. If you're a Scorpio on the cusp of your fourth house and you're inheriting any emotional issues, you're inheriting anything that can be dealing with the past, you're inheriting anything from your family, and you realize like this could be a thing, is you struggle with vulnerability. You struggle with sharing the things that truly bother you. You can say on the surface something's annoying, you don't do it like that, or I'm frustrated right now. But when you really dig down into like, hey, that makes me feel this way, or I'm sad, it is really hard sometimes for Scorpio energy to admit those vulnerable things of I'm sad. A Scorpio energy is more likely to admit it's mad. I'm just talking about the energy, not the person, but over being sad, right? Revealing things that have happened to you, revealing moments where you didn't have control, revealing things where you didn't have power is really hard, especially for Scorpio placements, but also Scorpio in the fourth house. So you could have grown up with a parent or someone in the family who can place a lot of their emotions on you. They might place a lot of their issues on you. They project a lot on you. Or also it could be situations where you grow up with someone who doesn't show or teach you how to be vulnerable. And it causes an issue because when you have, the reality is whatever's on the cusp of your fourth house is what you need to feel emotionally safe. So actually vulnerability and understanding the truth, the root, the seriousness of your feelings. Understand your feelings are more serious than you think they are. That's fourth house. That's fourth house IC stuff, but also it's just fourth house stuff, Scorpio. But fourth house Scorpio stuff is understanding that. But if you aren't honest because you grew up and you're like, you can't talk about that, you're being too much, it's not a big deal. or a parent or sibling or someone who had influence over you just not unpacking how they felt, having a heavy weight on them. It would impact you too. Maybe you feel like you have to be strong all the time. Maybe you feel like you can't reveal the things. And when you hide things, sometimes you also are hiding them from yourself. And that's the biggest thing, is like making sure that you aren't hiding the truth behind what you really feel, because you are dealing with situations that you never dealt with when you were younger, or you were kind of your environment you were brought up in didn't allow for there to be vulnerability for you to truly understand how you felt. You had to have like a hard exterior. Sagittarius on the cusp of your fourth house. Sagittarius, and you are having issues with your emotions, or you realize this is a theme, or fourth house past issues, whatever the case may be. For you, it can be, I talk about Scorpio. Scorpio is more the emotional truth of things, right? We're talking about that when I bring up truth. When we're talking about truth, when it talks about Sagittarius, it is, you could grow up in a situation where there is this disconnect between the things that you actually truly want to believe in. You can feel really tied to the belief systems of somebody that you grew up with. You can feel like there was no option for you. You can feel like you are constantly trying to prove that you are in some way loyal to the way in which you were raised to be. This could be people who grow up in a certain religion and then they're struggling in their adult life because it's really not for them. Or they are meant to break free, but they can't do it, right? You've Sag on the cusp of your fourth house, and you are dealing with any issues. It can also be a very overbearing person. People who are insensitive, growing up around family members who are, you're the butt of the joke. You're always the butt of the joke. You know, your siblings are always, you're the youngest and they're always talking about you, but it bothers you, but you don't say anything. So Sag on the cusp of the fourth house can also be like growing up, just having this kind of, having to learn how to just deal with what people say to you, because Sagittarius energy can be quite blunt. And again, I'm not talking about Sagittarius as the archetype. I'm talking about Sagittarius on the cusp of the fourth house for people when this can be an issue. It's not always an issue for everyone. And so you can then internalize that. And then in your situations with people that you're close to, you kind of do that same thing to your kids, or you do that same thing to your partners. And you're just kind of like, well, I'm just telling it like it is, right? Because you believe that is a sign of love, because maybe that's what you grew up seeing, right? And it's like, it happens often. It doesn't mean your siblings or your family doesn't care about you, but people sometimes think it's funny to tease and taunt people in their family because it's all love, right? But when it bothers a person and it impacts how they view themselves, then it can create issues later down the line. So for you, it is about understanding and learning sometimes how to say things, how to speak to people, how to not let your truth get in the way of how you are still caring for other people's feelings in ways where you aren't being so brutally honest that you're actually tearing people down. And again, this might not be relevant for everyone. If it's not relevant for you, okay, so you probably have some positive aspects in your chart, meaning that for you, your fourth house or your family life is not going to cause you that many issues. This is for people who have identified, they're trying to figure out, and this is one piece of the puzzle why this could be, the case. Capricorn. If you've Capricorn on the cusp of your fourth house, if you're dealing with past issues, if you're dealing with anything residual from your family or your upbringing, Capricorn here can mean there is this pressure on you to perform or do well, to succeed. Sometimes it can mean you struggle to really enjoy life. Maybe you grew up with a parent who was always working or always talking about ambition, or a parent who was always chasing this big goal that they didn't have the opportunity to even have fun, right? You didn't have the opportunity to go on vacations. You didn't have the opportunity to go do certain things. And now in your life, you could be kind of duplicating that, or you feel this pressure to like work or achieve this big thing. But you might pause when it comes time to actually enjoy life in the way that you could, or you have escapism. You feel that pressure so you can escape, especially if we're talking about Capricorn in the fourth, and then you have Aquarius on the fifth. You have placements in Aquarius, right? You could be a person where like you over then indulge on the finer things in life, the pleasures in life, because of the fifth house, because you're dealing with an immense amount of pressure from your past, from how you were raised, or a person in your family that was very strict, a person in your family who was very like reserved or limited in the affection maybe that you were given. And so now you are trying to find that affection, find what you might not have received through your fifth house, especially people that have Capricorn fourth house cusp And then the 5th house, they have placement. So now they're trying to reinvent what they didn't get as a child if they didn't get the love that they want. Because remember, we're dealing with Capricorn energy. I'm not saying that's a loveless sign. I'm saying sometimes if you have placements in Capricorn, or a family member has Capricorn, or there's anything to that, it can be a person who's really disciplined. Like a parent's very disciplinarian. They provide for you, but there isn't always this shower of affection and love. Now, again, we would have to look at your birth chart to know your relationship with your parents, of course. And some people, that's not what Capricorn means in their chart. That's why birth chart interpretation and analysis and analyzing where the placements are in your chart is going to tell the difference. Some people do not have this problem, and Capricorn's 4th house means they had a hardworking parent that showed them what success looks like. But for some people who are struggling, this might be why. Aquarius, if you have Aquarius in the cusp of your 4th house and you are dealing with past issues, past emotional problems, anything of that nature, it can be related to this kind of distance away from your emotions, not really directly, not like Scorpio, where Scorpio is this lack of vulnerability. With Aquarius, it is this lack of understanding what your needs really are. And so this is the parent who is doing everything. Like if you had a parent who's doing everything for everybody else, the extended family, family friends, but at home, the kids feel neglected, right? Because Aquarius energy feels that calling. And it's even worse, not worse, but if the parent is an Aquarius placement. So you grow up seeing that, and that's a great model for how to care for people beyond your family. But you could also feel alienated from what you feel you need, because Aquarius in the 4th house cusp can sometimes mean you are not true to what you emotionally want, because Aquarius is not an emotional sign. It's air. Right? It's air, and it's air that is fixed. And so, but we're putting it in the 4th house, which is ruled by the moon in astrology, and Cancer energy, which we know is emotional. And so here we aren't true to the game of what we really feel. And so what can happen is you grow, you feel that way. You are chasing something outside of what you are to feel fulfilled. And it's not always a bad thing if you have a dedication to a cause. But sometimes it can lead a person to over-identifying with groups, friendship, organizations. You always got to be a part of something because you didn't get it when you were younger in your family, and you have unresolved issues with people in your family. You have unresolved issues with people who made you feel different, people who didn't accept you. So, though we can always go and meet new people and move away from home, sometimes those wounds never heal. And so it can also mean you feel a disconnect from people you don't need to. You might have an issue with your parents, but your siblings had nothing to do with that. But you associate your siblings with your parents. And so you felt this distance. Aquarius, ruled by Uranus, distance, disruption. So sometimes it is us running away from something when we didn't feel we received it. But it's always important for us to identify like who in our lives needs to be there, who in our lives has caused the hurt and the harm, because it can cause us to lash out on the wrong people, and it can cause us to duplicate that process. Because again, if you feel more comfortable with your family, your friends, and then you go and have your own family, if you haven't done the work, you might repeat that same pattern with your own children, right? Where you are like, well, I put them in all these activities. I pay for everything. I'm doing all these things. I bought them this great, bouncy castle, and they had this great party. But if you have not tapped into your own emotions, if you have distanced yourself from your emotions because of problems that you have early, it can filter into other areas of your life in the future. Now, if you have Pisces in the cusp of your 4th house and plus, the criteria plus, you're dealing with any emotional issues from your past, from residual energy, from your upbringing, things that are passed down to you. It can be this kind of idealism. It can be being overly idealistic to the point where you lose sight of the things that you actually care about. It can mean you are tied to things that are not rooted in reality. You craft whole commitments around things that aren't real. You have a person in your life who's very selfish, but you somehow have devoted your whole life to that person. You have a person in your life who continues to disrespect you, but you still in some way are always there for them when they need you, but they're never there for you. You can have a fantasy idea and lack clarity around boundaries. So if you're struggling with boundaries, either creating boundaries or having boundaries, it can be, if you have this problem, Pisces on this cusp, where you grew up where there were no boundaries in your household, or there were loose boundaries and there weren't boundaries between adult and child, or there weren't boundaries between certain family members, or it was very unclear, you didn't have structure. So now you're here thinking that that is okay. And you are operating in situations where you may sometimes be the one overstepping other people's boundaries, right? Or you could be one in which you don't have any because you grew up and your mom didn't have any boundaries, or your dad didn't have any boundaries, or there was something within your upbringing where you felt you now struggle to know what structure even looks like. And so because Pisces is mutable and because it's water and because we're talking about Pisces not in its idea, we're not talking about Pisces in its best form. I'm not talking about Pisces as a sign, and right? I'm talking about if you have issues with this fourth house and we're talking about Pisces, we have to talk about the problem with it. The problem could be that you aren't living in reality. There's a lack of structure, there's lack of boundaries. And so your relationships and with people that you care about are always going to kind of have this looseness about them, being unclear, because there haven't been the appropriate structures and organization happening. And you have to think about that, especially if you're someone that wants to have your own family, of what does it look like? Because it's going to look like sometimes you have there's a looseness around the family, the dynamic, the structure, the home. It could be there's nothing that's really permanent. It always feels like it's something that's likely to change. There's no clarity. It's just we're just gonna pick up and go, and maybe we'll like this place, right? Like a person that you moved around a lot in your childhood, and now Moon and Pisces, maybe Moon and Pisces in fourth house, right? You moved around. Maybe you have energy in your third house, neighborhood. Maybe you moved around a lot of different houses. And so how do you create that narrative for yourself now in your adulthood where you don't have that level of instability? Okay. Now, again, that's just an example. And I'm not saying everybody with this placement will have that. That is why birth chart interpretation and readings are a thing, because we then get to take the basic definition of a sign. And then we have to look, any astrologer has to look at the whole chart, all the possible variances, and then everything we know about the person, and then come up with these interpretations of what does it mean for you. But this video was specifically for people struggling with that fourth house, and they know it's something to do with their emotions. This could be one of the reasons.